In this video, I'm going to share 9 key benefits of intermittent fasting, also known as time-restricted eating, where you eat your food in a shorter window of time each day or most days. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into all the research behind each of these, but I'll explain some of the basic physiology so you can kind of understand it, and I'll mention a couple books that kind of underpin a lot of the things that I'm going to say. And also I've listed a bunch of references and resources on various blog posts on my website previously. So if you're new here, I'm Ben. I'm a PA, which is similar to a doctor, and I share tips and strategies and other info to help you get started with fasting so you can improve your health. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the list. 9 key benefits of intermittent fasting. The first one that I want to mention is intermittent fasting helps you smooth out your blood sugar or kind of normalize your blood sugar. So high blood sugar is a super common health problem these days. Everybody and their dog has it. I'm half kidding, but a lot of dogs are unhealthy too because they eat a lot of processed food. But yeah, tons and tons of people have high blood sugar, right? And that's known as prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. That's mainly what I'm referring to as type 2 diabetes because type 1 is a totally different kind of disease. But if you have diabetes, it leads to a bunch of terrible complications in many cases. It used to be called a progressive irreversible disease because they didn't think there's anything we could do about it. But it's becoming more and more clear that you can improve your blood sugar and even put diabetes completely into remission, type 2 diabetes. So intermittent fasting helps improve your blood sugar because when you don't eat as often, your blood sugar, if it's high, it kind of starts to come back down to normal if you go a while without eating. So pretty simple process, right? So that's number one. That's the first benefit, is that fasting can be pretty effective at improving blood sugar. Benefit number 2 is that fasting helps normalize your insulin level, which means that it helps get rid of something called insulin resistance. So a while back, I read a book called Why We Get Sick by Dr. Ben Bikman, who was also on episode 18 of my podcast. And in that book, he explained that most adults in developed countries like the United States have what's called insulin resistance, which means we have too much insulin floating around in our bloodstream because of all the processed food we eat, basically. I mean, that's kind of the short version of it. So when you eat a lot of processed food, your insulin's spiking all the time, and after a while it doesn't work as well because there's just too much of it. So your body has to kind of turn down the signal so you get insulin resistance. And insulin resistance seems to be at the root of many, if not most, chronic medical problems. And so that includes diabetes, which I talked about earlier, and prediabetes, but also things like migraines, heart disease, polycystic ovary syndrome, some types of cancer. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that is kind of caused by, or at least significantly contributed to by, insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, again, kind of means having your insulin be too high and it doesn't work as well, so your pancreas has to pump out more and more. And so as you fast, your insulin level, which is high, can kind of gradually come down to normal, so you can normalize your insulin eventually with fasting in many cases. So that's why fasting is beneficial not just for the insulin itself, but for many of those other conditions which are related to insulin resistance. The third benefit I was going to mention is fasting, intermittent fasting, can help reduce your risk of heart disease or heart attacks, heart problems. And there are a couple different reasons for that. One is if you can improve or get rid of high blood sugar and diabetes, then you've drastically reduced your risk of having a heart attack because people with diabetes are way more likely to have heart attacks and strokes and other vascular problems, blood vessel type problems. But another one is cholesterol. So cholesterol is very misunderstood. I've explained this elsewhere, but basically on your typical lipid panel or cholesterol panel, the most impactful thing, the thing that seems to have the strongest connection with your cardiovascular risk or your risk of having a heart attack, is your triglyceride to HDL ratio. And when you fast, your triglycerides get lower, which improves your triglyceride to HDL ratio. So there's clearly an overall improvement in your lipids with fasting compared to not doing any fasting, at least for most people. And that results in a lower risk of having a heart attack or other heart-related problems. The fourth benefit I wanted to mention is fasting can help improve high blood pressure. So high blood pressure is another very common health problem nowadays. Seems like when I work at the ER, like at least half of the people I see have high blood pressure, and many of them are on medicine for it. So it sounds pretty benign. You're like, oh, whatever, I have high blood pressure. But it's also known as the silent killer because you may not know you have it until it's causing a problem, like contributing to your risk and maybe causing a heart attack or a stroke, for example. So many people have high blood pressure, and it can cause a lot of other health problems down the road. Another one would be kidney failure. High blood pressure is a common cause of kidney failure, which means you'd have to go on dialysis and spend a lot of your time just having the machines, filter out your blood multiple times per week. So high blood pressure, I talked in more detail about it in episode 31 of my podcast about how fasting and nutrition and other lifestyle changes can improve blood pressure. But basically, what causes high blood pressure? Well, you guessed it, insulin resistance is actually one of the main causes of high blood pressure. And so if you can normalize your insulin, you'll probably normalize your blood pressure. And one of the reasons for that is because when your insulin is high, your kidneys hold on to more water and salt. And so the more water and salt you have inside your blood vessels, the higher your blood pressure. Simple concept, right? Like if you had a pipe and you put more water into it, the pressure is higher. So it's the same thing in your blood vessels. So again, fasting will kind of help normalize insulin, it will help your kidneys function better, and therefore it can help improve your blood pressure. And also, I recently learned that fasting increases the parasympathetic tone, I believe it was. And so specifically, fasting kind of helps balance your nervous system in a way where you don't have as much of the fight and flight, and you kind of have more of the rest and digest or kind of relaxation side of the nervous system. So don't quote me on the exact wording there, but Dr. Mark Mattson is a researcher who explained that on a podcast that I listened to recently. So that was blood pressure. And the next benefit I wanted to mention is intermittent fasting, again, also known as time-restricted eating in most cases, can improve your sleep quality. And the reason I clarified that it's time-restricted eating is because this has to do with your circadian rhythm and the timing of when you eat each day. So Dr. Sachin Panda wrote a book called The Circadian Code. And in that, one of the many things he explained was that if that you have kind of like two different circadian rhythms. One is governed by light and one is governed by food. And so the timing of when you eat, there's kind of a secondary circadian rhythm that your liver is kind of in charge of. And so the timing of when you eat impacts your sleep quality indirectly because it's impacting your circadian rhythm. And so basically the long and short of it is basically you don't want to be eating too close to bedtime. And so if you're doing time-restricted eating, usually you're stopping at least a few hours before bedtime. And so that gives your gut a chance to digest the food, so it doesn't have to be doing that while you're sleeping. Because apparently trying to digest while you sleep, it makes you have worse sleep quality. So that's why time-restricted eating improves your sleep quality. Benefit number 6 is that intermittent fasting improves your brain health. And there are a few different ways to look at this. One is that when you do fasting, it increases something called BDNF. What is that? Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which means that it's a growth factor in your brain. So fasting is one of the things that stimulates that, one of the things that can stimulate that, and as a result, it kind of helps your brain repair and just function better. It can kind of grow and repair and that sort of thing. BDNF seems to be low in people with depression, and fasting helps bring it up. So it could be good for mental health. Also, when you fast, you boost your ketone levels, and there's some evidence that ketones help reduce anxiety. Ketones also seem to be helpful in preventing Alzheimer's disease, and people after a brain injury usually do better if they have ketones on board. So the brain obviously seems to function better when it has access to ketones, at least intermittently. So that's part of it. And then, of course, reducing your risk of stroke is another way that you're indirectly improving your brain health. Because once you have a stroke, obviously parts of your brain could be dead and not working at all. So if you can reduce your risk of stroke, which you would do by what I mentioned earlier, improving your blood sugar and reducing insulin resistance and all that, means you have a much lower risk of having a stroke, and your blood pressure also, that's related to your stroke risk. Then that's another way that fasting improves your brain health. Benefit number 7 is that fasting helps with weight management, helps reduce body fat and kind of control your weight, or my weight. So I've noticed that ever since I started intermittent fasting back in 2017 mainly, that it's just been way easier to control my weight. So even if there are times of year like the upcoming holidays when I'm feasting on, a lot of different things, I can kind of balance that out by doing some fasting at other times, or just on a daily basis. I'm eating in a more narrow window of time. So I'm probably not eating quite as much food, but regardless of the amount of food, the hormone changes are also beneficial when it comes to weight management, like having lower insulin. Because when your insulin's high, you store body fat. When it's low, you can burn more body fat. So the hormone changes are probably the biggest reason why fasting helps with weight management. And then also the amount of food you eat is also influenced by that. Okay, we're getting to the home stretch. There's just 2 more benefits that I'm going to mention. So benefit number 8 is that fasting actually helps control hunger. Counterintuitively, right? You'd think if you do more fasting, you're going to get hungrier and hungrier. Well, no, it's actually the opposite. So yeah, if you start fasting and you've never done it before, you're going to feel pretty hungry at the beginning because your body hasn't adapted yet. But as time goes on, there's this hunger hormone called ghrelin, which usually spikes at the times of day when you're used to eating. But as time goes on, it'll kind of readjust. The schedule of when ghrelin spikes will change because you're getting used to eating at different times. And so then you won't get as hungry, say, in the morning when you used to eat breakfast and you're not eating breakfast anymore. So you won't even get as hungry at that time. I don't really get hungry at breakfast time anymore. And years ago, I used to think I always had to eat breakfast, but now I just basically never eat breakfast and I don't get hungry at all in the morning. So once you train your body a little bit, you won't be as hungry at those times. And in general, the more fasting you do, the lower that ghrelin gets, is another thing. So fasting just kind of helps control some of this hunger overall. And when you're not eating as much junk food, you also won't get hungry as much. Because when you eat junk food, it spikes your blood sugar, it comes crashing down, and then you get hungry right afterwards. So if you're not doing that as often, you won't get hungry as often. So basically, you're retraining your body, kind of retraining your circadian rhythm. It's kind of like Pavlov's dog, right? So you're just training yourself to react to things a little differently, and so you won't get hungry as often. And it's also related to some of the hormone changes that I alluded to previously. So the last benefit that I wanted to mention is fasting is very convenient. So this is not necessarily a health benefit, but I guess it could reduce your stress levels and stuff if you have more convenience and don't feel as overwhelmed. So fasting is very convenient for the very obvious reason that if you skip, say, 1 meal a day and you're now only eating 2 meals a day instead of 3, you save a lot of time. So in my case, I don't really ever eat breakfast. So in the morning, I don't have to be like, oh, where can I find food? Oh, I have to cook it. Now I have to clean up and, spend half an hour or an hour dealing with that. So I just skip that whole process. So I save a bunch of time and I can focus on other things. So that's why fasting is convenient. And if you were doing the opposite, where maybe you don't eat dinner or you don't eat lunch or, something else where you have like a little bit different schedule, then obviously you have more time to work or more time to spend with other people or whatever it is. So fasting is convenient. So I went a little bit more in depth on some of these benefits in episode 3 of my podcast. I'll put a link below in case you want to check that out. As always, this is not individual medical advice because I don't know any of your individual circumstances, but this is general information that can probably help you improve your health. Now that you understand a little bit more about the benefits of fasting, maybe you want to put it in practice. And if that's the case, I've got a video right here that explains how to get started in an easy 2-step process. So it makes it super simple. And then I also have a video right here that explains how to get started. It goes a little more in depth on how to do it and also explains a 10-day challenge that can help you get started with intermittent fasting. So go ahead and check out either one of those videos, and I'll see you in the next video.